Hey, welcome back to the About the Labor podcast here at VikingsTerritory.com. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald, and today we've got a short week, so we're just going to jump right into the Lions preview for this week, skip over the midweek analysis for the Rams, just because we're short on time. So we'll jump right into this, talk a little bit about Matthew Stafford, the different changes that have happened since the last time the Vikings and Lions played each other. Go over some injury stuff, and it should be a relatively short episode today. So we'll get you guys out of here and to enjoy your Thanksgiving tomorrow. So let's start off here with a word from our sponsor. This is SOCOM Creative once again. Is your website ugly? It's time for an upgrade. It's almost 2018. If your website doesn't look good on a smartphone, you are losing money. That's just how it is. It's time to call an audible. Take your business to the next level with a professional quality website or a mobile app. Thank us later. The world is changing. It's time to score touchdowns. Stop missing field goals. If you want your business to grow online, you need a web, social media, and mobile presence that gets the job done. That's SOCOM Creative. They build apps, websites, and create winning strategies. Check them out at www.socomcreative.co. That's SOCOMcreative.co. All right, moving into this Vikings football now. We got to start off with Big Balls Case Keenum because
Big Balls, yeah.
For anyone that missed that press conference yesterday, Mike Zimmer said that his favorite thing about the Vikings quarterback is that he has big balls, that he takes chances, that he gives his receivers an opportunity downfield, and basically he doesn't shy away from attacking vertically, which is a lot of fun. And I agree with Mike Zimmer on that as well. I think we've actually talked about that relatively recently on how those are some of the traits that we actually really do like about Case Keenum. But heading into this Detroit matchup, obviously Keenum, he has played Detroit before. This is, but this has kind of a different feel to it, doesn't it? Right? Because the last time the Vikings played against Detroit, Keenum was kind of. It's a lot different now. I don't even know how to explain it really, but basically Keenum is just grown in the eyes of Vikings fans, grown on this team. He feels like the rightful. It depends on your vantage point, I suppose, but he is the rightful starter to a degree. I don't know what degree that is in a lot of people's minds, but yeah. You feel excited about him being a potential starter here heading into Detroit. What can he learn, I suppose, in his second round this season? Yeah,
I mean, I just think obviously everything's different when you have a 6-game winning streak. That changes the whole dynamic of the team, the emotions of the team, and I do believe in the momentum. I mean, there's some people out there that don't believe in momentum, but I mean, it's pretty clear that I think that it's an intangible thing that exists and impacts anything in life, but particularly sports, and I think that's definitely something to keep in mind here with this game. And it's, I do think a short week could throw off some of that stuff, but this is completely different. The Vikings running game in particular, in that first Detroit game, it really stumbled when Dalvin Cook, towards ACL, no pun intended. And then Latavius Murray and Jerick McKinnon didn't have the chemistry built with their offensive line. And for one thing, the Vikings didn't have the chemistry built between those two. How are they going to manage those two on the ground? And they kind of slowly figured that out. So, to be fair, I thought that's probably Keenum's worst game of the season if I'm looking back at it, which, it wasn't terrible by any means. It's just I think that when I look back at that game and the way he played, I think that was probably his worst game, and that I think is part of the reason the Vikings lost. Obviously, there was a couple turnovers and fumbles and mistakes on defense kind of too, but I think that was a game the Vikings were, it was very winnable for the Vikings. And if they correct a few things, and they obviously take this offense into that game, which is just, humming right now. Yeah. I think it'll be, very difficult for the Lions to win, because the problem in the past for these past couple of years hasn't been the defense. In the regulation, the Lions have scored 16, 16, and 14 points the last 3 games, and they've lost all 3. So it's going to be, whether the offense can put up that 20-point number, and I think at this rate, it's fair to expect that they should.
Yeah, well, anytime you win a game scoring 14 points, you should feel lucky. That's what Detroit did earlier this season, obviously. That's not a winning strategy, trying to hold teams under 10 points. And more often than not, that's not going to happen. So I think you probably have a fair argument in saying that the first Detroit game of the year was probably Case Keenum's worst performance, or at least right up there with the Pittsburgh game.
Probably the Pittsburgh game, but
it's one of those two.
It's close.
It's obviously the Detroit game had a much the
circumstances were different in the Pittsburgh game, so I kind of give him a pass there, but yeah.
Regardless, he gets a do-over here. He gets a mulligan, as a golfer might say, and he has an opportunity here to do some real damage. I mean, this is still a very solid Detroit Lions team. I think that this team is a little bit overhyped to a degree, just because we've seen what they can do this season. We've seen them kind of play at their peak, and their peak is not necessarily the same team they were last year. They have some question marks, but they also have some really good players. So, let's start here just straight from the top with Matthew Stafford. I don't think that he has changed much since the last time we've seen him. He's still a phenomenal quarterback. He still can make plays, moving his feet. He can using his arm, looking off safeties. He's a smart player. He's got the natural talent, and he's rolling. So he's got a couple of very good receivers playing out there for him in Golden Tate, Marvin Jones, and Kenny Galladay. I don't see an elite receiver in this group. I think Golden Tate is very good, but I don't think that he is a guy that I want to. He's not my wide receiver for the next 10 years if it's up to me. I would rather have someone with a little bit more upside, but I do like him. I think he's a good player. I think probably the biggest change in this matchup since the last time, Greg Robinson, the left tackle, he has since been cut and is no longer with the Detroit Lions. He's the same guy that Everson Griffin referred to as a lazy player the last time we saw him, and his replacement is the guy that comes off of the injury report. That's Taylor Decker, former Ohio State Buckeye, phenomenal left tackle. Even Everson Griffin said that the difference is palpable between the two players in that Taylor Decker is a hard worker and a good player, and he reiterated once again that Greg Robinson is in fact a lazy person. So Taylor Decker comes in against Everson Griffin. That's probably the biggest change here, at least from the offensive perspective for the Detroit Lions. What are you seeing from Taylor Decker? Are you concerned at all? Is this a guy that Everson Griffin can beat? And is this does this become a premier matchup here in the NFC North in the coming years with a younger player in Taylor Decker and an advancing player in Everson Griffin?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way to put it. It depends obviously how, because I think Everson Griffin is probably on the back half of his career, and Decker's obviously emerging as probably a solid left tackle in the league. But I could definitely see that in the next 2 to 3 years, something kind of a fun matchup there. And in the past, Griffin hasn't had much of a challenge in the NFC North, with the exception of maybe David Bakhtiari the past couple of years. But it's I don't think it's a question of can Everson Griffin beat this guy. It's just how much can he be contained, because that's really how good Everson Griffin is. Even last week, he didn't record a sack, if I remember correctly, but he was impacting the game the entire time. And and then Hunter gets a sack. I believe Tom Johnson, I think, got a sack. So I think people like to quantify Everson Griffin's performance based on sacks when he's doing so many other things that he's beating left tackles regularly, regardless of who it is. It's just that sometimes it doesn't show up in the stat sheet because there's extra chips, there's double teams, there's quarterback sliding from the protection that way because they know how good Griffin is, and then it results in other players getting the recognition for that in the stat sheet. So I think Griffin will be just fine. I think he can still beat Decker somewhat consistently. It just might not be as consistently as he did Greg Robinson in the previous matchup.
Yeah, I highly doubt that. That's for sure. This offensive line for Detroit, with Taylor Decker coming back, pretty strong group of five here. Ricky Wagner and TJ Lang on the right side, obviously. Those are two guys that the Vikings chased during free agency this past offseason. Former Green Bay Packer and former Baltimore Raven. Travis Swanson and then Graham Glasgow are probably the two weakest links kind of combined there. Neither player has necessarily had a standout career to date. Not saying that they can't, but at this point, those are probably your two guys. The center and the left guard are where the Vikings are going to get have an opportunity to get an interior pass rush. So I would take a look at Linville Joseph this week, Tom Johnson. Those two guys are probably going to be very important, given that the strengths of this Lions offensive line and they built this in a specific way, I think, around Matthew Stafford. The strengths are those bookend players, and Taylor Decker and Ricky Wagner. Those two guys are very important to what Detroit likes to do.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen this team basically go 70% passing at times. So it's very important for them to get that 3 to 5 seconds for Matthew Stafford so that he can get his guys open, especially with players like Marvin Jones, who, in my opinion, is still trash. I've been having this take for 2 years. I'm going to continue running with it. He gets no separation. He's not elite after the catch. He's a good player. He's going to play in the league for plenty more years, but he's not going to do a whole lot. That's the type of players that Matthew Stafford has around him, with exception to this offensive line. You could say the same thing about Amir Abdullah, Zach Zenner, Theo Riddick. All of these guys, they're quality athletes that get the job done, but to some degree, they're all limited. Every single one of these.
A lot of it is Stafford creating stuff and trying to make that extra or sensational play, which it has come back to bite him a few times this year.
Yeah.
I mean, he is second in the league in terms of time sacked at 30. He's been sacked 33 times this year, and only Jacoby Brissett has been sacked more. But I think a lot of that, from what I've seen, is just him trying to create something extra, which, I mean, he does kind of have that hero ball in him, and it's a lot of times in the past it's worked out. Obviously, you see his fourth quarter performances the last few years, and he likes to make that hero play, and sometimes it does come back to bite him. And I think the Vikings can take advantage of that today, because they like to flush quarterbacks out of the pocket. They like to make quarterbacks uncomfortable, and I think Stafford's one of those guys that if you can fluster a little bit, he won't play up to his expectations. And I think if you look at the last 3 games, that's been the case between these two teams. And Stafford has kind of been he's been held in check. I think that's to say the least. And it's been really the Vikings offense that has held the Vikings back from winning each game.
Yeah, absolutely. So you take a look at this offense here. We've mentioned Golden Tate, Marvin Jones. Theo Riddick has obviously kind of become at least a household name within the minds of Vikings fans, because we've been playing him for so many years. Eric Ebron, former first top 10 pick, hasn't really panned out at tight end. He was in the trade rumors for Detroit earlier this year. There isn't necessarily one guy, with the exception to Matt Stafford, that is who to look out for. I think this is fairly subjective on who the most dangerous player on this Lions offense is. So why don't we round out the offensive side of the ball here with give me your weakest link and the most dangerous player, as like we did last week.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. It's not the most dangerous player, but I think the guy that, if he gets loose, could really impact the game. And I'm gonna say Amir Abdullah, because I just look back to last game, and he kind of really guided things for the Lions offensively in the first half. He nearly got 100 yards. I think he hasn't had 100 yards in his career in a game, I believe, on the ground. But he had 94 against the Vikings in that game. And I remember specifically 2 or 3 times he drilled the Vikings on cutback runs. And I've been very adamant about the Vikings needing to be better about that. And it's just that a lot of teams don't scheme for that. And I think they should, to beat the Vikings. But the Lions did that week, and it ended up costing the Vikings a win. So if the Lions repeat that scheme, repeat that game plan with Abdullah, I think they could have some success on the ground against the Vikings, because that's been the one way teams have beaten the second-ranked rushing defense in this season. But the weakest link, I like your Marvin Jones, but I'm going to go I'm going to go with Eric Ebron, and I say that because I think he's having a very disappointing season. And if I remember correctly in that last game, I don't believe he had a big game by any means. I think the Vikings kept him under control for the most part. So it's just, I think the Vikings linebackers have held tight ends pretty well in check this year, and it's been kind of an area where the Vikings have improved quite a bit. Let's see, I'm looking at last game. Eric Ebron had exactly 2 catches last game for 17 yards. So I think Barr and Kendricks have been up to the challenge this year. Harrison Smith, obviously, and Anthony Harris played tremendous last game. So I'm going to say that Eric Ebron is probably the least threatening weapon that Detroit has, but I'm not exactly impressed by any of them, with the exception of Golden Tate. I think he's pretty solid in the slot.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised you didn't pick Theo Riddick as your most dangerous player on this offense, just because you look at Theo Riddick's body of work, especially if you're a fantasy football player and you've had him on your team before.
For PPR.
Yes, he is. He is a roller coaster type player because some weeks he gets no touches, sometimes he gets all the touches. You look at the Vikings' defensive composition and what they try to do and what teams have tried to do against them in the past. Lots of screens, get the ball out quickly in order to prevent that defensive line from getting to the quarterback. That all, to me, makes Theo Riddick very relevant in this game. So I'm going to call him the most dangerous offensive piece that Matthew Stafford has to work with here, simply because he is a disaster in the open field. If you get him on a one-on-one tackling situation, he's extremely shifty, so much finesse in those legs. He just does a phenomenal job once the ball is in his hands. Now, the problem his entire career since he came out of Notre Dame has basically been, how are we going to get the ball into this guy's hands because he doesn't run between the tackles all that well. So you don't need to really necessarily worry about Theo Riddick as being a rusher despite being a, quote, running back. What you need to worry about with him is him catching the ball in the backfield and going 90 yards just because he has that elusiveness and he has that breakaway speed. So for me, if there's one guy that can hit you hard, it's Theo Riddick. I like your pick on Amir Abdullah because honestly I think that Abdullah is like a more complete version of Theo Riddick. Very small, shifty type player that can do a lot of different things. Abdullah is simply just a better rusher than Riddick is, whereas Riddick is probably a better receiver. So both of those guys can do damage out of the backfield. It's going to be interesting to see what they can do with this improved offensive line, with Decker coming back, giving Matthew Stafford some more time here. But for me, the weakest link, and I think that Eric Ebron is probably the safest pick, at least among skill players, guys that are going to, you expect to do something in this game. Ebron has a way of kind of just falling off the map completely for a couple of weeks. We've seen this throughout his career. He's just been a very inconsistent player. But I'm going to stick with Marvin Jones. I'm going to die on this hill. I'm cool with that. This is the guy that comes over from Cincinnati 2 years ago. He gets a massive contract. He didn't want to be in the shadow of A.J. Green anymore, and maybe, just maybe, he should have stayed there because he is a good player. He's a quality wide receiver. He's going to catch the ball if it's thrown at him, but he's not a number one receiver, and he's getting paid like a number one receiver, and he still has a ton of drops. He still has separation issues. He still has, he's not doing anything crazy, in terms of 50-50 balls or yak yardage or anything like that. He's just a very mediocre, run-of-the-mill wide receiver in this NFL, and that's fine. That's going to get you a job. But Lions fans and just, I guess the Lions too, because they signed him to the contract, they've been treating him as this number one target basically since it happened. And we all know it's Golden Tate. Don't try to screw with us. We know Golden Tate is the number one option here. Marvin Jones is, honestly, he's a solid football player, but there is nothing scary about this guy. I still don't understand why they tossed all that money at him.
He's definitely not scary if the Vikings shadow him with Xavier Rhodes. I think he's dominated that matchup the past, 3 games, probably more if I remember in 2015. He wasn't even on the Lions in 2015. But regardless, he has been dominated by Rhodes since he became a Detroit Lion, and I have no concerns about that matchup for basically the reasons you said, and the fact that Rhodes will likely be covering him most of the day.
Absolutely. Just before we switch over to the defensive side of the ball, I do want to point out Darren Fells because he does a lot more than I kind of figured that he would, the number 2 tight end. He's so much more reliable than Eric Ebron. I expect the 87 gets his number called a few more times than 85 this week. Just keep an eye on that and how they, how Jim Bob
also used a lot more as a blocker too.
Right.
In that ground game.
How Jim Bob Cooter likes to manipulate those 1 and 2 tight end sets with his 2 very different tight ends here. And obviously, the biggest takeaway for me on this offense, the biggest difference since the last time, is Taylor Decker coming back. It'll be interesting to see what Everson Griffin can do against, a guy that has been injured, but has also been very successful during a relatively short tenure in the league. So we'll keep an eye out for all of that. Jumping over to the defensive side of the ball for the Detroit Lions, and of course that means the offensive side of the ball for the Vikings. Starting with this defensive line, this is a 4-3 unit. Terrell Austin is a phenomenal defensive coordinator. I think that we have gotten used to him. As Drew said in the beginning of the show, he has been holding this Vikings team basically to 1 or 2 scores over the last couple of years. He's done and for the most part, too, this isn't necessarily the most talent-heavy defensive team you'll ever see. They're just extremely well-coached, very smart players.
There's really one elite player. Well, maybe two if you argue Darius Slay, but Glover Quinn in the back end at safety, Darius Slay at cornerback. And after that, you just kind of have a bunch of guys, a bunch of people that exist, and he's making it work. And it's not like they're an elite defense, but they're a middle of the pack in terms of both rushing and passing defense, and they're good enough to where this offense, when it gets explosive against mediocre to poor defenses, it's good enough to earn some wins. So I think, I'm looking at their rankings right now. Let's see, they are 20th against the pass, but they're 18th against the rush, and they have actually the fourth most forced turnovers. So they have their big play defense, and I think that could cost the Vikings again this week. The Vikings haven't turned over the ball a whole lot this year, but I think if they do, the Lions absolutely take advantage. They do take them back for 6 points sometimes, so that's going to be the main concern for me, is taking care of the football, because I believe it was actually a turnover by Adam Thielen in the previous game that essentially iced it for the Lions.
Yeah, stretching towards that first down line, and the ball popped loose for Adam Thielen. It's basically taken one turnover to lose the last 3 matchups. I mean, has it not? You think about the interception of Sam Bradford by Darius Slay that put an end to last Thanksgiving. So basically, the Vikings, a big piece here is just winning the turnover battle. And that's something that you have to like about Case Keenum. It's undeniable about Case Keenum that he has been very good managing the football. And that's something that he has it gives the Vikings an opportunity to win just, week in and week out. So starting from this defensive line, again, I don't see this as the most talent-heavy defense in the world, but I do think they're well coached. And I think that this team plays a lot like that 2009 Saints team with a bend but don't break defense and a bunch of different guys that can create turnovers at virtually every single level here. You still like Ziggy Ansah on this defensive line. He has kind of struggled and been an up and down player over the last couple of years, whether that's injuries or just the fact that he's actually 54. He's a strange defensive end, but a guy that can definitely get after the quarterback quite a bit, creates a ton of pressure. Dangerous athlete in that regard. At the second level now, you've got Jared Davis, who has been phenomenal, relative to rookie standards, I suppose. And then Tahir Whitehead probably doesn't get enough love for being a sure tackler, a rangy linebacker that can go sideline to sideline and do a lot of different things for this defense. And then, like you said before, the secondary is really where they make their money. They have their 2 best players, in my personal opinion, within this unit, in Glover Quinn Jr. and then obviously Darius Slay. So they have the potential, similar to the Vikings, to basically shut down one side of the field, as they have that one, the safety over the top that can do some damage, and then they've also got that shutdown cornerback in Darius Slay. Is their combination nearly as good as the Xavier Rhodes-Harrison Smith combo? No, let's not even go there. But the point being here is that they can do a lot of the same things that the Vikings do, simply because they have that talent in the secondary, and they get enough of a pass rush most of the time from Ziggy Ansah to kind of kill that internal clock and sort of just over time create some bad throws, some bad situations, and that tends to result in what has been over the past couple of years a Glover Quinn interception.
Yeah, I think this Detroit defense does rely on some big plays from those guys for sure, but I'm going to look at a couple guys in particular this week. I like Anthony Zettel, I think he's a pass rusher on the left side of the Detroit defensive line. He'll be going up against Rashad Hill, who has filled in. I'm assuming it'll be Rashad Hill. Mike Remmers has been limited in practice. I don't believe he's passed concussion protocol, so I doubt he plays, and I would assume it's Rashad Hill in there. It'll be, Rashad Hill filling in has been really, really good in pass protection. I think he's one of the top, efficient in terms of pass efficiency, pass blocking efficiency on Pro Football Focus in the league right now in his, short stint. So I like that matchup a lot because Zettel has been pretty good himself rushing the passer. I think he leads the Lions in sacks, so that'll be a good fun matchup to watch. But I look at Detroit's defense, they're 10th in third down defense, which that's something to watch too, because I think the Vikings have been mostly good, but if the Vikings can't get converted on third down, that could be a problem.
Yeah, that's typically a problem week in and week out. But generally speaking here, this defense has a couple of studs, a couple of weak links, and a lot of kind of role players on this defense. You look at guys like DJ Hayden, guys like Nevin Lawson, a couple of cornerbacks there, Miles Killebrew. These are all guys that will get in on the action, but not necessarily be a major factor. Jalen Reeves-Maben has been playing more, and that kind of bothers me a little bit just because it seems like he's progressing a lot faster than people thought, and that was the guy that I really liked coming out of the draft. So keep an eye out for him. He's number 44. He's a very athletic guy that can do some damage at that middle level. But yeah, let's finish up this defensive side of the football with most dangerous and weakest link once again here. Who we got?
I just think most dangerous is Glover Quinn. I think he's very savvy out in the center field kind of role. I think he baits quarterbacks into throws really well. I think he mostly got the best of Case Keenum in the last matchup. So that'll be something interesting to watch where he's lined up, who he shadows. Because again, when you have Diggs and Thielen, which side of the field are you going to shade over? You know what I'm saying? So right. I think watching that battle will be interesting because I think the Vikings will basically go away from his side of the field. So I would assume they kind of tend, based on recent results here, they'll tend to kind of shadow Thielen over the top, or at least kind of give him an extra emphasis in coverage. And I think Diggs could have that big day, especially if they do match up Slay on Thielen, or they kind of have bracketed coverage in the slot on Thielen. I think that could leave Diggs most of the time one-on-one and these short and intermediate routes. So I think based on what Detroit does in coverage with Quinn and then how they deal Thielen, I think that could open up things for Stephon Diggs. So I'm going to say Glover Quinn is probably the most dangerous player and most impactful player on Detroit's defense.
Yeah, I'm going to, I don't think there's a lot to work with here. Simply, this is kind of a runaway, in my opinion, with Glover Quinn, like you said, being the most dangerous player on this defense. He's not just the most dangerous, though. He's also the most consistent player. He's a good tackler. He's a solid tackler. Not an elite tackler, but he gets the job done very consistently. He's extremely dangerous basically when he can work on his instincts. If he's going off of his own instincts and sort of reading the field, we've seen him make some incredible breaks to the ball in the past. He's just a very dangerous player across the board in a lot of different ways. And then his floor, the worst that you see Glover Quinn is always very high. This is a guy that just has been getting it done at a very high level, essentially since he got to Detroit. He's been a solid player. He continues to get better. He's definitely the most dangerous player, and he's the most game-changing player potentially in this game between both teams, just because he has had such an eye for that football and creating big-time interceptions. You don't want to pass over guys like Darius Slay and Quandre Diggs, who have been playing very well this year, but it's fairly definitive to me that Glover Quinn is the most dangerous player here, just because there's just so many different things that he can do to ruin you, and he has been doing them to the Vikings for the last couple of years here. So on the other side here, weakest link, in your opinion?
I'm going to say kind of in combination, I'm going to just say the interior of the defensive line. When you look at, guys like they got Ashawn Robinson in there, and then you have Spence in there too. What's his first name? Akeem Spence. There you go. And then I just think, especially since Haloti Ngata went down, their rushing defense has not been great, especially in the kind of the middle of that unit. I believe, trying to find the number here where they are rushing defense. They are 24th in yards per attempt allowed. So that's kind of especially increasing their number anyway of yards per attempt allowed in the last few weeks. So I like Latavius Murray and Jerick McKinnon to kind of get going early, and that was the difference in the last game where Dalvin Cook did get some success early, but then as soon as he went out of the game, the rushing attack crumbled, and I believe out of 9 attempts they had 21 yards between the two of them, Murray and McKinnon. So if they can get them early, get them going early, establish that, and then the play action pass off of that, which Case Keenum has been phenomenal all season in play action passing. I think that's where you attack Detroit's defense, is just kind of right up the middle where Haloti Ngata's gap used to be, and and then I think from there you add the play action passes, you attack with your rollouts and stuff from there.
Yeah, the weakest link, in my opinion, is the guy whoever it is that's playing opposite Darius Slay. Most of the time,
sure,
that's going to be Nevin Lawson. Sometimes it's going to be Teez Tabor. But generally speaking, that number 2 cornerback spot is the weakest link on this Detroit Lions defense. It has given them a lot of problems.
Could be DJ Hayden too.
Yeah, it could
one
be
of those 3.
Yeah, exactly. Any one of those, number 2-ish cornerbacks are having have been having some trouble here. And if you look at the way that the Vikings are composed here and the way that they have been lining guys up, I think that there's a chance that we'll see Adam Thielen on the outside more than in the slot this week, simply because Quandre Diggs has played the slot pretty well in coverage this year. And you think about, Stephon Diggs going up against
maybe more two receiver sets with Diggs
Yeah.
and Thielen on the outside instead of the three receiver stuff to kind of get that matchup with Hayden or Tabor or Lawson, whoever it is,
Yeah.
and kind of eliminate that slot cornerback matchup with Diggs.
Or do they get into more three receiver sets with kicking Jarius Wright into that
that
slot
too.
spot,
Yeah.
and then you could run Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs on the outside and basically have them pick their poison there, and give one of the guys.
This is what you get when you have receivers that can play anywhere on the field.
Right.
And you have Diggs and Thielen that can go both in slot and outside. You can mix and match and really take advantage of a defense that does have a weak link like this in the and their cornerback position.
Yeah, and for the most part, most teams are fairly weak at that number 2 spot. I mean, Nevin Lawson has had solid stretches this year. I don't mean to take away too much from the guy. He's still a professional, but he's just relative to what the Vikings like to do with their receivers and how well they have been playing, passing the ball over the top of defenses 15 plus yards, 15 plus in the air downfield. I think that Nevin Lawson is probably the guy to keep an eye on here. When you're looking for a scapegoat at the end of this week, I think that he's probably the guy for the Lions, just because based off of what Diggs and Thielen have been doing and what Keenum has been doing with that offensive line protecting everyone so well, he is just kind of. It seems like it's a lock for him to get burned at least once at some point this game. So keep an eye out for that. Most of the time we don't necessarily talk about special teams. I just wanted to point out that Matt Prater is really annoying to start.
Yep.
Just from 50 plus is just nothing. He's been doing it for years, whether it was in Denver or Detroit. Now he makes our lives hell. With the game tying field goal to send it to overtime last time. What has this special teams in Detroit is basically, you don't want to overlook them. That's kind of that's the message that I want to get across here before we jump into our picks, because you look at Matt Prater being an outstanding kicker. Sam Martin has been solid as a punter, not necessarily elite by any means, but very solid. And then Jamal Agnew, I believe he's the only guy in the NFL that has 2 kick returns for touchdowns this year. So he's getting the job done in a big way, very quietly from that special team spot. So there are some playmakers on all 3 phases of this Detroit Lions team. That's why they're always in games at the end. This is what the Detroit Lions are. It's going to work sometimes, but as we've seen this year, with the whole make a comeback in the last 2 minutes thing, they have somewhat regressed to the mean in terms of allowing to come back from these ridiculously absurd deficits. It's just not, you don't want to bet on that every single week, and yet that's kind of what the Detroit Lions do, and to some degree it works for them, and to some degree it makes them kind of you understand why they have fallen off a little bit this year, and why the Vikings potentially are the superior team in the North. I suppose we'll probably find that out on Thursday.
Yep.
Let's jump into our picks for the week here, and then we'll finish it out here. Starting with this Minnesota-Detroit, the first game of the week. Who you got?
I'm going to pick the hot team here. I'm picking the Vikings. I think the difference – well, I shouldn't say the difference. I think this game will make the difference in the NFC North. If the Vikings win this game, I can pretty confidently say that they will take home the division crown, host a home playoff game. Host at least one playoff game and get that home field advantage that is obviously so valuable. And if they don't win this game, again, I keep mentioning Detroit's schedule, but it's super easy. They have the Bears, the Ravens, the Bengals, the Packers, and I can't remember the other team. But regardless, the slate is very easy down the stretch for them. So I really think this game could determine the NFC North. And that's why, again, I think this is probably the biggest game on the schedule. More important than the Rams game last week. But I think the Vikings get it done because I think this offense is humming enough to get over that 20-point hump. And I do like the defense to continue to hold teams under 20 points, including Detroit. So I'm going to say Vikings 24, Lions 17, and that's my final score.
Yeah, I'm going to take the Vikings as well here. I'll take the Vikings I'll say 27-17. Here's why. I think that the Vikings are, on paper, they're simply the better team here. The more complete roster. The difference being is Matthew Stafford, because they have the better quarterback in this game. It's pretty similar to what the matchups between Minnesota and Green Bay, in my opinion. If the quarterback can be neutralized to a degree, if he can be contained to a degree, you should like your chances of winning, despite the fact that the Vikings have, struggled to score over 10 points even over the last 3 matchups or so. So I like Minnesota in this game. I'm going to take Minnesota in this game. I think that this ultimately is a game that decides the division for Detroit. If they lose, it's over. I don't see a way for them to come back. If they win, they keep their hope alive and have an opportunity to fight for another day. But this is a make-or-break situation for Detroit if they're planning on winning the NFC North. I don't see it happening. I'll take Minnesota. Moving on to the next one here. We got the Los Angeles Chargers against the Dallas Cowboys. Who you got?
I mean, this is a really difficult one because I feel like this is one of those games where the Chargers, they always kind of win a few games a year. That they should not, but I'm going to take Dallas anyway. It's Thanksgiving at home. I think the Chargers are also one of those teams that's very prone to meltdowns, and I think this could be one of those cases here. So I'll take Dallas just kind of for that reason. I also sort of am nostalgic about Tony Romo calling the Cowboys game, so that could be really fun. I'm looking forward to that after the Vikings get a win.
I didn't even realize that it definitely is fun. I am going to take the Los Angeles Chargers in this game for a lot of the reasons that you just said. I know that they're a meltdown team. They kind of are the meltdown team in the NFL, but I still like Phillip Rivers quite a bit. I think that they have the best couple of players in this game, period, and Joey Bosa and Phillip Rivers. I expect them to beat Dallas this week. Dallas is just not – they do not look like the same team at all without Tyron Smith and Zeke Elliott in there. So I'm going to take the Chargers to win this football game. On to the next one here. We got the Giants at the Redskins. On paper, you'd think that this was going to be a very formidable or fun late-season matchup.
Yeah.
And yet we've got the Giants essentially out of it, getting victory. They did get a victory against Kansas City last week, but that doesn't really change what's going to happen the rest of the year here. And then you've got Washington, that's still kind of this up and down roller coastery team. Seems like their playoff hopes are dwindling as well. So who you got in this football game?
I'm taking Washington. I don't think the last week's win over the Chiefs for the Giants it's not telling of the Giants. I think it's more telling of the collapse of the Chiefs in that offense, which is suddenly just putrid. So I'll take the Redskins. I just think that's a safer pick, especially at home.
Yeah, I will take the Redskins as well for essentially the same reason that you have. They look like the better football team. Again, this is a game that could go either way, especially in a divisional bout. But generally speaking, when it can go either way, you take the home team. That's why I'm going with Washington. On to the next one here, Tampa Bay at Atlanta. Two teams that not really living up to expectations this year. Atlanta obviously salvages a win last Monday night with Blair Walsh coming up short on that 51-yard field goal.
LOL.
Yeah, LOL, yeah. Who you got in this game here, this NFC South matchup?
I'll take Atlanta just because, they are the more superior team here. And I don't like Tampa Bay. I think Ryan Fitzpatrick is still their quarterback right now. That's kind of enough reason for me, but the fact that the Falcons are at home, too, in that huge new stadium, Falcons. Tampa
Bay is definitely free-falling right now with everything that's going on there. I don't think I'm going to pick them the rest of the year, to be honest. So I'm going to take Atlanta.
Fair.
I'm going to take Atlanta. And we're going to move forward here into Cleveland at Cincinnati, the battle for Ohio. It's going to be a barn burner here. Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Kaiser and Andy Dalton here. This has the potential to be a really funny game, I think, with a lot of interceptions and some interesting spectacles.
Good old-fashioned 12-10 win for some team. Yeah.
Cleveland, I think this is an opportunity for Cleveland to get a W. Do you think that it will actually come to fruition, however?
It definitely is an opportunity. I thought last week against Jacksonville was a good chance, and they did have that they had a chance down the stretch before a late turnover.
Yeah.
I'll take Cincinnati, though, just because it's the Browns. Although I will say that I saw, I think it was a graphic or something about how Cleveland is technically still alive for the playoffs. They're 0-10 and can still get in if, I think it was 47 games remaining for the remainder of the season. If 47 games go exactly this way, like all the right teams win, they can get into the playoffs. And one of those games, the result had to be a tie. So, hey, you're telling me there's a chance Cleveland could go, run the table here, have some luck, and they could be in the wild card, AFC wild card. So
yeah, I don't see that happening. I'm gonna take.
I wouldn't bet on it. But hey, maybe it's one of those where you throw $10 on it just because if it happens, you're gonna be a rich person. You don't have to work again. So
that is true. But I'm gonna go with Cincinnati this week. I don't know, man. The battle for Ohio, it's fallen apart a little bit in the last couple of years here. This is probably not going to be that great of a football game. I'm going to take the better quarterback playing at home to win this game, Cincinnati. Speaking of luck, though,
nice.
No luck still for Indianapolis. Can Tennessee go on the road?
Sad. That's so sad.
It really
they botched that situation so bad.
It really is. So can Tennessee go on the road? Marcus Mariota playing fairly well right now. You've seen DeMarco Murray and Derrick Henry kind of playing in unison in the backfield, doing a great job. Can they go into Indianapolis and get a W this week?
They can, absolutely, but I'm picking the Colts just because you're picking the Titans, and I want to increase my lead. So I'm going to say this, though. So I expressed that I think Case Keenum this year is still the same quarterback as he was previously. He's just in a better situation, and that's kind of lifted his performance. Think about Andrew Luck playing in a situation that's not a complete dumpster fire. And he was still performing at an elite level in Indianapolis. Think about him in a good situation. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, I mean, you got a fair point here. You're also, carrying the torch for the Andrew Luck club.
I am.
So, take it what it is. I've got Tennessee in this game. I like Marcus Mariota more than Andrew Luck right now, at least, simply because he's healthy, and that's the difference in this football game.
Oh, good one.
These are two bad football teams.
Good analysis.
Yeah, pretty solid analysis. These are two bad football teams, in my opinion. Tennessee is not quite there yet. I hope they get there. I think that they are certainly doing a great job rebuilding their team.
I just think this game will be high scoring. Both secondaries are pretty bleh. So I like this to be high scoring.
This could be an interesting AFC South matchup, I suppose. On to the next one here, Buffalo at Kansas City. What you got?
Speaking of Buffalo, just because the Chiefs are the 2016 Vikings. So that's basically all. It's coming to fruition, like literally almost exactly the same way the Vikings did last year. I wouldn't say it's not more because of injuries. I think it's because the Chiefs have fallen in love with these weird, like, gadget offensive plays that they need to stop running. And then they're going to catch teams off guard in the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season. But then you have to actually figure out and establish an offense at some point, and I don't think they've really done that. And instead, then you get Travis Kelce throwing interceptions down the field. So I'll take the Bills.
Yeah, I'm going to take Kansas City just because Buffalo's a dumpster fire right now. Sean McDermott.
Both teams are a dumpster fire right now.
They really are, but the more blazing, dangerous, threatening fire here, that is in Buffalo with Nathan Peterman.
Fair.
So I'm going to take the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't even feel like I don't need to explain myself on that one. On to the next one here, Miami at New England. We don't even need to talk about that one.
Essentially, the next four we don't even have to explain because
so
pretty
both of us are going with New England here against Miami in Foxborough. I think that's pretty reasonable here. Carolina at the New York Jets. The Jets have regressed to the mean. Both of us are going with Carolina in that game as well. Then you've got this Chicago at Philadelphia, which could be a fun game, maybe. But you doubt it. So both of us are going.
You doubt it, yeah.
Both of us are going Philadelphia, and that one being played in Philadelphia once again. And then the next one here, Seattle at San Francisco, a divisional matchup. I don't think there's much to talk about with this game either, really. So kind of a lot of bad football games here in the middle stretch. But that leaves us here with Denver at Oakland, which it's a divisional matchup. Both teams are not necessarily playing up to snuff, but two very talented rosters. Probably the two best pass rushers in the NFL featured in this game in Von Miller and Khalil Mack. Who you got in this Denver-Oakland showdown?
I'll take Oakland, but I do think I'm very curious to see how Paxton Lynch does because I believe he's getting the start this week for Denver. I think is it his first career start? It might be his first career start.
Probably so, yeah.
I'm very interested to see how that goes. 'Cause that quarterback circus has been hilarious all season long. You go from Trevor Siemian to Brock Osweiler to Paxton Lynch. It's just it's a circus. But I do think the Raiders win this game just because it's Lynch's first start. But if he had gotten his feet wet prior to this game, I might have picked Denver in this game.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to take Oakland as well. I don't like Paxton Lynch. I think he's bad. I always thought he was bad. I never really understood the love affair with him. And Denver has been bad, really bad. Like, the defense is bad, the offense is bad, offensive line can't block. Nobody's doing anything in Denver, so I'm taking Oakland simply by default here because Denver is they're falling apart. And, you see that to a degree with the Seahawks as well, with just these teams that were so great 3, 4, 5 years ago, starting to fall back down to earth here. Denver is definitely in a free fall right now, in my opinion. So that's what makes the Raiders the pick in this game. On to probably the best game of the week, with exception to our football game. That's the New Orleans Saints and the Los Angeles Rams being played in Los Angeles. Should be an absolute shootout. Should be a ton of fun. There's a lot of playmakers on both sides of the ball for both teams here. But at the end of the day, what you're going to be looking at here is these vertical offenses. Drew Brees going downfield and Sean McVay's revamped offense with Jared Goff coming off of that loss to the Minnesota Vikings. So who you got here? I feel like this is definitely a game that is literally a coin toss. Who knows what's going to happen here?
I see that. I think it's recency bias here, I think, but because I think the Vikings opened up some holes in the Rams. So I'm picking the Saints here. But I'm rooting hard for the Rams because it'd be really nice if the Rams were able to come back, get this win over the Saints, and give the Vikings a game cushion on both of those teams, plus a tiebreaker over both those teams for that first round bye. So, but I mean, I can't pick against the Saints. I think they're really rolling right now. That defense, I mean, that comeback they had against the Redskins, that was kind of their falter down the stretch game, and they still won it. So, I'm going to take the Saints here.
Yeah, I have nothing wrong with that. I'm taking the Rams simply because I expect a rebound performance. But like I said, I expect this game to be basically a coin toss. One bad turnover by Drew Brees playing on the road. That's probably that could be the difference here. That's why I'm going with the Rams. I just simply think that they're a safer pick. Though I do like your point about the fact that the Saints are rolling and the Rams, I mean, do we know what they are now? This could be a situation for them where they could, hypothetically begin a free fall, losing the Vikings last week, Saints this week, and they've got a tough road to hoe on their schedule as well. So this is an interesting result here. Where the Rams go from this game, we'll see. On to the next one here, Jacksonville at Arizona. This is kind of an interesting game because Jacksonville, to me, is a team that hasn't really proved that it's real just yet. They need to do a lot more, and part of proving you're real is beating up on the teams that you need to beat up on, even when you're playing on the road. If Jacksonville believes that it's a playoff team, that it's a team that could potentially challenge for a number 2 seed, potentially, maybe a number 3 in this AFC postseason, they need to whoop up on Arizona this week. That's what I've got them doing. You seem to have a little bit different of an opinion on this football game.
I have a very hard time buying into Jacksonville being good. So I'm just going to kind of keep picking against Jacksonville. And eventually I think I'll get a win there, but I don't know. I can't buy into Blake Bortles being a playoff quarterback. It's just weird, even though he's literally being carried by the defense. I don't know. I'm picking Arizona just because, I mean, if it was on the road, I'd pick Jacksonville at home, but I'll take the Cardinals at home. I think it's going to be a low scoring, something like 4-2. I don't know.
I'll go with Jacksonville just because Adrian Peterson is washed. Drew Stanton is your quarterback.
Blaine Gabbert. Blaine
Gabbert, excuse me.
Blaine Gabbert. His former team, revenge game. Blaine Gabbert revenge game. There you go. That's the reason I'm picking the Cardinals.
Give me Jacksonville for sure then. On to the next one here. We got Green Bay at Pittsburgh. Are you going to give – I'm going to ask you this. Instead of phrasing it who you got, I'm going to say, is Green Bay going to win another game the rest of the season if Aaron Rodgers doesn't return?
They'll win another game. Oh, yeah. It just won't be against the Steelers on the road.
Yeah, that's probably a safe pick. I think that's probably all the, quote, analysis that you need on that game. Then we finish up this week with Houston at Baltimore. Real barn burner here. No Deshaun Watson still. Who you got in this football game?
At the Ravens, moving to 6-5. And I believe they're a playoff team anyway right now at 5-5.
Is the AFC a dumpster fire? I think the AFC might be a bit of a dumpster fire.
Outside of New England, Pittsburgh, and Jacksonville, I think it's fair to say that it's a dumpster fire.
And Jacksonville could fall apart real quick with Blake Bortles at quarterback.
If Cleveland can still make the playoffs mathematically at 0-10, it's probably a dumpster fire. So I'm taking the Ravens to move to 6-5, which is really weird to say because they're not even good at all. So.
Absolutely. So that, I believe, rounds out the show.
Houston? You're picking Houston.
Oh, yeah, I am. I am picking Houston. That's right. Yeah. I don't know why. Good. I don't have a reason for that. I just took Houston just because I like Houston more. How about that? Deal with that. All right, so that rounds out the show for the week. We hope that everyone has a phenomenal Thanksgiving break and, spending time with your family. Thanks, as always, for taking your time out of your week to spend some time with us. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, iHeartRadio. Hit the subscribe button on YouTube if you have not already. Make sure to check out SOCOM Creative, absolutely fantastic sponsor of ours. And, so we will hopefully catch you guys later on this week. I believe we will have a show up on Friday. We'll see what happens, though. That's the game plan moving forward. And no pregame show for the week. Drew and I are not going to get up and do a pregame show on Thanksgiving. Sorry about that. So we will catch you guys later on this week with some other sort of live video analysis show. We haven't decided what we're going to do here. But the point being here is, and make sure to enjoy your holiday, folks. Make sure to enjoy this Vikings football game. And hopefully, when we talk to you guys next, the Vikings have a 3-game cushion in the NFC North and really start pulling away towards that postseason that we all are waiting on. So, thanks for listening, and we will catch you guys later on this week.